She walked into the courtroom carrying a mop bucket and a quiet confidence that no one seemed to notice. The fluorescent lights flickered above as the janitor moved across the marble floor, her gloved hands gripping the handle of an old broom. The room was full, lawyers adjusting their ties, clerks shuffling paperwork, a judge scribbling impatiently behind the bench. No one gave her more than a passing glance, except the judge, Judge Margaret Holloway. Sharp, cold. She was known for her brutal efficiency and even sharper tongue. From the moment the janitor entered, Judge Holloway's eyes narrowed, not out of curiosity, but disapproval. Something about the way she stared made it clear. She didn't think the woman belonged there. The janitor paused to clean a scuff mark near the defendant's table. That's when the judge leaned over the microphone and said, loud enough for the courtroom to hear, "Does she know this is a courtroom, not a cafeteria?" A few people chuckled. Others stayed quiet, shifting uncomfortably. The janitor didn't respond. She just kept working, head down. But her silence wasn't submission. It was restraint. And what no one in that room knew, not even the judge, was that the woman sweeping the floor had once stood at that very podium, not with a mop, but with a law book in her hand. And in just a few minutes she was going to remind everyone exactly who she was. The case being heard that morning was a zoning dispute, something dry and technical, involving an obscure section of state housing law. The defense attorney fumbled through his notes, trying to make sense of the statute in question. The plaintiff's side wasn't doing much better. The language of the law was vague, the intent buried in pages of amendments. Judge Holloway, visibly irritated, demanded clarity. "I need someone," she snapped. "Anyone in this room who can explain the original purpose of this section. Otherwise, I'm throwing it out." Silence. The attorneys exchanged nervous glances. One flipped through a binder. Another tapped frantically at a tablet. Then, from the back of the room, a calm, steady voice spoke up. "I can explain it, Your Honor." Every head turned. The janitor had stepped forward, her gloves now off, standing tall in the echoing stillness. Judge Holloway blinked, confused. "Excuse me," she asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. The woman didn't flinch. "I said, I can explain it. I wrote that law." You could feel the temperature in the room drop. The judge's face froze. One of the attorneys actually dropped his pen. For a moment, the courtroom was suspended in stunned silence. Then came the scoff. "You?" Judge Holloway asked, trying to compose herself. "You expect me to believe that you, a janitor, wrote the law this entire case is built on?" The woman smiled, not arrogantly, but with the quiet, self-assured dignity of someone who's been here before. "My name is Dr. Evelyn Carter. I served as a senior legislative advisor to the State Housing Committee for 8 years. That statute, Section 43B, I drafted it." It sounded impossible, absurd even. But as she spoke, the weight of her words began to settle. Dr. Evelyn Carter. The name wasn't unfamiliar to a few people in the room, especially not to the court reporter, who quickly began typing with a new sense of urgency. Judge Holloway stared, processing. "If that's true," she said slowly, "why are you here, cleaning the floor?" Dr. Carter took a breath, steady and slow. "Because once a month, I volunteer with a city-wide reintegration program. We spend time in places where we used to work, not as bosses, not as experts, just as people, to see what's changed, to stay grounded. And today," she added, "it was my turn at the courthouse." The judge didn't say anything. The silence said everything. In a room full of lawyers, not one had understood the heart of the statute they were arguing over, but the woman sweeping the floor had written every word, and now she was about to explain what it really meant. Dr. Carter stepped forward again, asking permission to approach the bench. Judge Holloway gave a faint nod, more a reflex than approval. The woman took out a folded piece of paper from her back pocket, a copy of the original legislative draft, complete with handwritten annotations and revisions. She placed it gently on the judge's desk. "Page 3, paragraph 4, she said. The intention behind the language wasn't to limit zoning rights. It was to expand protections for displaced tenants, We used deliberately broad phrasing to account for municipal flexibility. That's why the language seems vague. It was meant to be inclusive, not restrictive. She paused. Your ruling today could determine whether dozens of low-income families get to stay in their homes. That's why this law matters. The judge picked up the paper, her hands stiff. She read in silence, her eyes darting across the notes. Every line Dr. Carter quoted was there. Every edit was in her handwriting. There was no doubt anymore. The woman standing before her was exactly who she claimed to be. Still, Judge Holloway didn't thank her. She didn't apologize. She simply set the paper down and turned to the attorneys. Both sides, she said, her voice quieter now, will have 10 minutes to reassess their arguments in light of this clarification. As the judge retreated to her chambers, the courtroom remained stunned. Lawyers whispered. Court staff exchanged wide-eyed looks. But Dr. Carter? She simply picked up her gloves, nodded politely, and returned to her cart. Because for her this wasn't about proving anything, it was about reminding people of something they should never have forgotten. Before she left the courtroom that day, a young clerk approached her. I had no idea who you were, he stammered. Dr. Carter smiled gently. It's not about who I am. It's about who you assume people aren't. She wheeled her cart toward the exit, mop bucket rattling softly behind her, the courtroom doors swinging shut in her wake. And that, believe it or not, was just the beginning. If you're still here, you need to hit that subscribe button, because the story doesn't end here, not even close. Stay with me. By the time Judge Holloway returned to the bench, something had shifted. The courtroom felt different, less like a place of power, more like a place of consequence. No one laughed now. No one whispered. The silence had been replaced by something else, awareness. The attorneys returned to their tables, reassessed their arguments, and, more importantly, their attitudes. But Judge Holloway, she was still unsettled. She called the court back to order and proceeded, her voice steady but missing the sting it carried earlier. As the defense lawyer stammered through his revised presentation, Judge Holloway interrupted him with a single question. Counselor, when you cited subsection B of 43B, were you aware of the legislative intent? He hesitated. No, Your Honor. Not in full. Then why, she asked coldly, did you present it as if you were? The lawyer had no answer. Neither did the plaintiff's side when asked the same. They hadn't done their homework, but the janitor had. Because she didn't need to look it up. She had lived it. Dr. Carter stayed in the back of the courtroom, arms crossed, silent. She didn't intervene again. She didn't need to. Her presence alone had recentered the room. Still, Judge Holloway struggled. The woman who once controlled this space so easily now found herself second-guessing every word. She flipped back and forth through her notes, occasionally glancing toward the rear of the courtroom, toward Dr. Carter. But she never spoke to her again. Instead, she moved through the remainder of the hearing like a machine, efficient but emotionally absent, and at the end of the session, she simply said, "Ruling postponed. Further review required." Gavel down. Session adjourned. The crowd began to disperse, but word of what had happened had already started to ripple beyond those four walls. Court staff were texting friends. One of the clerks was already typing up a memo about the exchange, not for gossip but for record. They wanted it documented. Outside, in the hallway, Dr. Carter walked calmly toward the exit. Her volunteer shift was over, but before she could reach the door, she heard fast footsteps behind her. "Wait," said a voice. She turned. It was Judge Holloway. But now she wasn't speaking from behind the bench. No robe, no elevated platform. Just two women face to face, in the fluorescent hallway of a public courthouse. "I owe you an apology," the judge said. It didn't come easily. Her jaw was tight, her eyes tired. "I misjudged you. Completely." Dr. Carter gave a small nod, not with anger, not with satisfaction, just acknowledgement. "I appreciate that," she said. Judge Holloway took a breath. "You embarrassed me, in my own courtroom." Dr. Carter raised an eyebrow. "I didn't say anything to embarrass you." "I know," the judge replied. "That's what makes it worse." There was a long silence, one that didn't need filling, but Dr. Carter, ever measured, finally spoke. "We all have blind spots. What matters is whether we let them define us." She turned to leave, but the judge had one more question. "Why do you do it?" she asked. "The cleaning, the pretending." Dr. Carter looked back, expression unchanging. "It's not pretending. I was raised by a woman who cleaned houses for a living. She was the smartest person I ever knew. I do this to stay close to where I came from, because if I forget that, I forget why I started writing laws in the first place." Then she left. No headlines, no viral videos, just the quiet echo of boots on tile. But the effect she left behind wasn't quiet at all. Over the next few weeks, that courtroom changed. Clerks were kinder, lawyers paid more attention to the statutes they referenced, and Judge Holloway. She stopped speaking from a pedestal. Her rulings became more thoughtful, her tone more cautious. One morning she addressed the courtroom before proceedings began. "I want to remind everyone that titles don't define wisdom, and uniforms don't define worth." No one had to ask where that came from, but Dr. Evelyn Carter never returned to that courtroom in uniform again, not because she was embarrassed, because she didn't need to. Her message had landed. Sometimes the people we overlook are the ones who built the systems we stand in. Sometimes the mop in someone's hand doesn't mean they're beneath you. It just means they're strong enough to do the work, no matter what role they've played. And sometimes, 5 words, I wrote that law myself, can dismantle years of quiet prejudice in a single moment. The next time you see someone in the background doing a job you wouldn't look twice at, think twice, because you never really know who's standing in front of you. Thanks for watching. If this story moved you even a little, hit the like button and subscribe. We've got more stories like this coming, real lessons, real power, and no fluff. Until next time.